And members of Parliament may be gunning for KPMG, but reports suggest the South African Reserve Bank has come to the firm's rescue. Reportedly, the Reserve Bank told the banks they cannot fire KPMG as it may undermine financial stability. The Reserve Bank issued a statement saying it would hold meetings with the banks and the auditors. A number of blue-chip companies, including Barclays Africa and Nedbank, have publicly said they are considering dropping KPMG. And as per media reports, here are the reasons behind the Reserve Bank's appeal. They say, as per rules, the big four banks, South African banks, must appoint 2 joint auditors from a pool, and the pool comprises of KPMG, Ernst & Young, Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers. The big four are required to rotate their auditors every 5 years. And the report says without KPMG in the mix, it would be harder to comply. Joining us in studio, Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, and Adil Nchabeleng, Transform RSA president. Sydney Sikese is certified financial planner and a member of the FPI. And thanks so much for joining us, gentlemen. Death by acronyms, IRBA or IRBA, or nonetheless, that is the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors. Let's start with you, Mr. Sikese. Yes. And in the conduct of KPMG, and we seem to have a level of protection from the Reserve Bank. Is this for you becoming of a regulator to intervene in this case?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. Representing the consumers in terms of financial services, you know, we're just saying in terms of confidence, you know, consumers who want to restore confidence. So the activities that have surfaced up to now goes in a long way in terms of trying to restore that confidence. You'll remember that there's a World Economic Forum which rates economies in terms of global competitiveness. South Africa has been rated as one of the highest in terms of auditing standards. So the activities to date would have to maintain that kind of, you know, level of ratings. So I think it's in that spirit.
Yeah, we'll test the concerns from the Reserve Bank, and I want to ask Michael Deur, a Reserve Bank shareholder, South African Reserve Bank shareholder, joining us via Skype. And I'm just going to shoot Mr. Deur in the interest of not losing connectivity with you. As a shareholder, do you approve of the alleged intervention by the Reserve Bank in what seems to be a protection of KPMG South Africa?
Thank you very much for having me again. We are very concerned because the KPMG report of the rogue unit, which was flawed and which was withdrawn, actually it was a hard lie. So the same applies to the KPMG report which they made in respect to this South African Reserve Bank valuation. And we are in discussion with the new CEO, with Mr. Lumo and with Mr. Cranston since 10 days. And it's quite a coincidence that now this whole thing pops up that KPMG is too big to fail, because actually it's maybe connected to the valuation of the South African Reserve Bank, where they value actually the Reserve Bank by the value of 2 BMWs, which is actually quite ridiculous. It's total trash, and this is actually connected as far as I understand. And I looked at today's discussion in the standard standing committee on finance, and the most interesting actually to me was not Mr. Maynier, but it was actually Mrs. Tandi's remarks about the theme that actually when the auditor, and she was actually saying that you have to investigate the conduct of the auditor, and there are different skills and purposes. And therefore, we are very concerned because KPMG should know what international practice is, and the SARB values its own shares in the Bank for International Settlements with net asset value, and common sense also says that an entity is valued the assets minus liabilities minus some discount, and not to the tune of 2 motor cars. And as this report was made to order for the Reserve Bank from KPMG, and SARB is the paymaster of what was ordered, the whole fee, what was paid, was actually a bribe. And this whole thing is connected again to the rogue unit report. And KPMG actually should withdraw its report, which they got paid for by the SARB and mandated for by the SARB, in respect to the valuation of the South African Reserve Bank.
All right, but we know that the power rests with the shareholders in deciding who would replace KPMG. Are you of the view that, especially with the call now from Parliament and government saying all the other work that KPMG has conducted with government needs to be reviewed and essentially the company being replaced? Michael,
sorry, we have a time. Sorry, yeah. We have a time delay. The issue is that actually in today's discussion in Parliament, there was a discussion about the SARB report and the IRBA report. And the ridiculousness of the whole thing is actually when Mr. Bernard Gallas actually said that actually it takes 18 months for the report about KPMG. I mean, there you see they actually only buying time and they don't actually want to close the books and actually want to go forward. And I have to say, what I'm very concerned is that on Saturday, I even got an email from this new CEO, from Ms. Lomo, that they will come back by Monday, by yesterday, with definitive answers about the flawed KPMG valuation report for the South African Reserve Bank. And she didn't come back, which is actually also not really okay because it's actually a lie. I mean, she writes on Saturday from her iPhone that on Monday, the legal department, and she comes back, and today is Tuesday and nothing came back. Therefore, I think it's connected, the Reserve Bank issue with the KPMG issue, because it's also connected then to the valuation about the nationalization debate, which is in the ANC. And that's another light which you have to shed on this KPMG story.
Mr. Khaliba, in your view, is the level of protection from the Reserve Bank raises questions as to why, for example, if you take the Bell Pottinger case, how they essentially were just dismantled very quickly, and yet we see sort of pussyfooting around KPMG. What do you make out of it?
Well, I think the conduct of the South African Reserve Bank, and specifically by the governor, is patently unlawful. The question that really hasn't been answered is this presumption that the body KPMG will retain its accreditation, IRBA accreditation, and that the auditors within KPMG, they too would be able to retain the accreditation and the registration as auditors under the Auditors Act or the Public Auditors Act of 2005. So the question that, well, what informed that presumption that KPMG would still retain is IRBA accreditation, and also IRBA, in terms of its testimony before the Standing Committee on Finance today, did not leave us any wiser in terms of decisively what action they are going to be taking, because here we have a self-confessed delinquent. The KPMG has confessed that, in fact, we should not trust any of their reports. And I think Mr. Michael Dure is quite correct that if they admitted in the one instance that we should place no value whatsoever on the work that they have done, why must, in this case, the valuation report they prepared on South African Reserve Bank also hold any value, or any other work that they have done? So I cannot see how the Reserve Bank can, with their best intentions, save this organization, which is now going to die from self-inflicted blows.
Yeah, but how do you then rationalize what the Reserve Bank has flagged as concerns, that there will be financial instability? There's a certain format that auditors work with the South African big banks, that they need to rotate after 5 years. And if KPMG falls out of that, it essentially derails the whole structure.
It makes a lot of sense, actually, Cindy. Today we are discovering that actually the banks have only 4 auditing companies that have been given a preferred procurement as well as a preferred status as suppliers. So within 5 years, there's not going to be any change. So they are quite right, for South African Reserve Bank to say that if you remove KPMG out of the 2 mix, it means you're going to have an imbalance in that structured banking monopoly with regards to service providers relating to being auditors and forensic auditors. So as a result, what happens happened today was actually quite a clown show in Parliament. You have a Parliament Standing Committee on Finance sitting in the whole session, behaving as if they are having a tea party and a wonderful lunch with their friends, instead of doing an interrogative process by which they can question these institutions, particularly KPMG, and ensuring that SAICA is well answers particularly, and IRBA gives a proper full accounting. We have institutions in South Africa that are not taking the laws of the country into concern, and they are flaunting around everything that they are supposed to be responsible for. So it was not the most impressive session held today. And from Transform RSA point of view, our simple call is we demand that government request that it gets paid back all its fees that were paid to KPMG throughout the period and contract life that it has ever contracted with KPMG. That is their first right that they should do. We demand that government must give a very stern warning to the South African Reserve Bank. Remember, this is a bank created by an act of government. They must give a very stern warning to say that they ever interfere in the operations of banking institutions in terms of who they can give preferential tenders to in terms of providing services. It must stop. The Reserve Bank does not have such powers, and Governor Lesetja Kganyago has already crossed his mandate by interfering, by sending out a mandate that actually demands on the banks that they should not remove KPMG. It is like having a criminal in your house and saying continue looting and stealing and kill everybody as long as you are within our protection. That is what is happening with this whole scenario, and we condemn it with the highest level of condemnation.
Mr. Michael Dwyer, as a shareholder, maybe you can shed some light if you have more detailed information or intimate information around the dealings of the Reserve Bank and KPMG, especially now with the controversy surrounding the auditing firm.
At the end of the day, I mean, too big to fail is nonsense in my view, because there are plenty of auditors around. I mean, you have, for instance, within the Reserve Bank, the audited books of the Reserve Bank, there's a black auditing firm, Zizwe, and there are other ones in the country who are capable of doing a good job for the big four banks. I mean, therefore, KPMG to take out of the game is not a problem for the South Africa, because at the end of the day, there are plenty of auditors around who can do at least as a good job as KPMG did itself, which actually they showed how bad they are in the flawed report of the SARS, of the rogue unit, and also in the flawed report in the utter lie about the evaluation of the Reserve Bank, which was also done by KPMG. Therefore, I think that you can actually really question the validity and the quality of their work with the last few examples they put out in their reports.
All right, please stay on the line. We have Jabu Mahlangu, SANCO spokesperson, the South African National Civic Organization. Mr. Mahlangu, thanks so much for your patience. And what do you make out of the calls that have been made to sever ties and relations with KPMG by corporate South Africa, certain banks, and also government largely? Do you think that the Reserve Bank ought to review its relationship with KPMG?
Well, when we spoke last time, we actually commended Parliament for taking a particular stance. And that's what we have been calling for, that everyone who has a relationship or had a relationship with KPMG, be it the National Treasury and the entities, they should sever those ties, because you have an entity here which is supposed to be held at the high level in terms of its corporate governance and the quality of input, reliability of its audit it's something that government is using. It's something that the public is dependent upon. If you come across a situation where you are told that there has been serious lapses in the system, surely the Guardian has failed to carry out their responsibility. And the whole question of who guards the Guardian comes into space. And therefore, Parliament, as the custodians of the rule of law in terms of lawmaking, they have a responsibility to hold anybody to account, because that's what that's the strength of being a constitutional country. Nobody should escape the questions of being accountable. And our view as SANCO is that indeed it's crunch time, but I think everything that is happening for for the good of the country, because out of this fiasco, we are hoping to find stability. We are hoping to see Parliament reviewing the laws that they have enacted, where they have allowed the corporate business to operate almost as a law unto itself, have its own codes, even when they are involved in corruption, change the name corruption into coalition and other names that are being used. Instead of calling a spade, we've had this cushioning of the corporate players. And I think it's good that we're going through this process. And our view is that when we come out of this situation, Parliament have a responsibility to review as to how these entities operate. And indeed, if people have to be severed, if they have to be delisted, they have to. Whoever takes authority must take. And whoever thinks that he's got other authority, they actually have to put their authority on the card and say, I have the authority to consider or reconsider or not to consider a particular decision. And therefore, indeed, we will, as SANCO, reflect on the Reserve Bank stance. But one of the concerns that we have, obviously, is that the Reserve Bank in itself is not actually a government-owned bank. It is actually a privately owned bank, and therefore, the dictates of private sector would always permeate. They will always come true because the shareholders determine as to the policy. You have a government who is not a major shareholder in the Reserve Bank, almost just an overseer. So I think the sentiment that we are getting here really needs some serious scrutiny, especially at the level of Parliament, as to whether we are properly structured at that level.
Please stay on the line, Mr. Masango. Mr. Rekadima, in whose interest is this insulation that we find of KPMG and also the Reserve Bank's interference, the fear-mongering almost to say, look, if they're not in the system, therefore there's going to be financial or economic instability?
Well, the insulation is in the interest of those that are fearful of all the other work that has been done by KPMG, which will most certainly be found to not have met the standard and in certain instances to have been found to have been implicit in criminality. So there are a lot of people that are fearful, but the question is that, well, should we allow that? If anything, I think IRBA itself did not cover itself in any glory today. They showed timidity, they showed no willingness whatsoever to be able to tackle this issue that affects the heart of the economy of this country. Out of the 4.1 trillion rand, which is our GDP, we must bear in mind that these 4 auditing firms, they earn handsome fees every year from auditing the 4.1 trillion rand GDP activity. And if we cannot trust one, the question that must be asked, how are we going to trust the others? And IRBA is the one that was supposed to have today at least given us that assurance. And on that which, on the select limited basis, which KPMG has admitted wrongdoing, IRBA by now should have at least been able to have attested on that which KPMG has admitted to, if indeed was borderline criminal, or if it was just perhaps maybe a lapse of judgment, or if there was any malfeasance. Now, today they haven't been able to provide any of that information, and they don't even show any inclination that they can provide that assurance within a short space of time. So if anything, I think we need an overhaul, and that overhaul must reach out even to IRBA itself and the Minister of Finance, because they report to him. He's the one who needs to now take the lead and act. And also the Minister of Finance needs to tell the Reserve Bank Governor to, as a belief, hey, muni interfering.
But let's go to the false reporting, or if the work is being reviewed, especially when it comes to the issue of corruption, where in certain government departments that are not well capacitated, people simply don't know how to do their work and unwittingly become involved in irregular practices. So what does that then say about how we've been told that at least 20% or so of government finances go to corruption, or that it even might be going to the big auditing firms, so them benefiting from this particular chaos in the system?
It clearly shows today that actually we have an auditing industry which is currently under question. Remember, it was KPMG that came forward and actually declared itself delinquent. it released itself, it actually reneged itself out of a report that it had provided, which is a forensic report, and said that we actually suspect some of our reports that we have actually provided in the past. And as a result, this whole matter actually untangled itself. So you're dealing with an institution, particularly in the auditing side of it, that has been using questionable means and ways by which they could report books, particularly the companies that are sitting on the Johannesburg Stocks Exchange. Remember that Sebo has just explained to you that we have got a 4.1 trillion rand of a GDP, which is the South African productivity economy. We still have another 12 trillion rand that is traded between the Johannesburg Stocks Exchange or Johannesburg Securities Exchange companies. So within that 12 trillion, these same companies are audited by KPMG, Deloitte, as well as PricewaterhouseCoopers and the other. So you have a situation where these institutions must now be investigated fully. There are reports that they've provided in the past. I can tell you with no doubt that there is a lot of questionable reports. We are sitting with a situation where, till today, transformation is still a question in the JSE, because the JSE has not been giving us proper reporting on their figures and numbers with regards to the level and percentage of transformation. And you know who has been cooking the books with regards to ensuring that we do not know the exact amount as well as percentage of transformation? It has been the auditing firms that has been given work by the JSE, and they've been messing around with the numbers in order to provide whatever reflection that their payers have been commanding them to do. So the auditing firms industry must come under an entire overhaul, and we must investigate every report they've given, and where they've been lying, they must pay back the money.
They must pay back the money. Straight, finish and clear.
Simple as that. They've made everybody else pay back.
Yeah. But the impact on consumers, and as you were saying, you know, people watching at home, all of it sounds very high-end and complicated. In what the material damage is, not only reputationally for the country or its clientele, but there seems to be a separation from KPMG International in South Africa. The executive in South Africa have fallen, and now we are made to believe that that is adequate punishment. They can still proceed to do business in the country. Do you think that is almost selective in how we deal with issues of impropriety?
Yeah, I think we need to drill down and maybe unpack what has caused the rot, and actually identify the individuals. And I suppose IRBA has got a debarment type of ruling where individuals would be debarred from practicing. So if IRBA can demonstrate that they are putting those who are at fault, they are locking them up, then I think consumers will be at ease to regard the auditing fraternity as credible. So I think a further drill down is required in terms of...
And Mr. Michael Durr, just before we let you go, in terms of your position as a stakeholder, we heard from Jabu Mahlangu saying the imbalance of power as it stands, with the Reserve Bank largely being held in private shareholding structures, makes it all the more autonomous and not really serving the interests of the country. In your view, do you care as a shareholder as to what the national imperatives are of transformation and looking at the behavior of the Reserve Bank as it stands?
I mean, that's part of our fight as active shareholders since 2006. I'm active with the Reserve Bank shares, that this stuff is being flushed out, is being discussed, which we achieved with the nationalization debate and other issues, and also valuation discussions. And I think it's very important for the society and the country as a whole that the whole skullduggery of the Reserve Bank is being flushed out, and that also the governor, Lesetja, is being seen as a liar, as he is once in a while. And I think alone the fact that when you come back to today's parliamentary hearing, that the body of the auditors is being paid for by the auditors, therefore they're biased, and IRBA is also having 9 people on the board, and 3 have been with KPMG and 1 has been with the Reserve Bank. Therefore you have to actually put the floodlight and the spotlight on those institutions, because how can they have a neutral report when actually people are maybe biased? I mean, therefore, I think we as shareholders have a controlling role in the whole issue.
All right, thank you so much
you
for
very
your
much.
time. I'm sure there's more that we'll uncover as information is made available. Michael Joe is a South African Reserve Bank shareholder joining us via Skype in Germany. Tsepo Khadima, political analyst. Adil Nchabileng is president of Transform RSA. And we have Sydney Sikese, a certified financial planner and member of FPI. What's FPI, by the way?
Financial Planning Institute.
Financial Planning Institute, death by acronyms only in South Africa. And Jabu Mahlangu is with the South African National Civic Organization as their spokesperson on the phone line. We'll take a quick break. See you shortly.
Sure.